about him in terms of getting deep into tunes is he knew. I don't think it'd be an exaggeration to say thousands, certainly hundreds, but I mean, I don't. There weren't many tunes he didn't know. He wouldn't know like B-side, blue note sides, but like standards, you know, going back to the 20s, he knew them all. And so, but he would still play a certain tune, like for 3 years, every Tuesday he would play Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered. He'd say, all right, y'all, the 3 Bs, you know, and he would just go into it, you know. And then 3-4 years, he'd switch, like, you know, or at a different club, he'd always play Violets for Her Furs. Or, you know, he would just he'd start one club, Stella by Starlight, and, you know, and he wouldn't play that tune anywhere else, you know. But he just wanted to get deep, deep, deep into those tunes and playing on them. And yeah, it was, I played with him at least one night a week. But as it, you know, without rehearsal or anything like that, you start to really know a person's playing, you know, even though he always had surprises because he had so much language and he was so creative. But I could feel when he was unsettled. I could feel like if he wasn't hearing the bass player very well or something like that, I'd play more straight ahead. I'd, you know, mark the form more, like on a night like that. And then when it was really flowing and it was really settled, I could play a little more freely. He liked the rhythm, even though he played, you know, quite modern, even avant-garde to some extent. Like he liked the rhythm section to, you know, Jimmy Cobb was his favorite drummer. Like the rhythm section, he wanted to be pretty straight ahead, and he wanted to create over that. And same thing with ballads. He didn't want a lot going on behind him. He wanted a real clean canvas to do his thing on, you know. But yeah, it's and then the other gig I did like that with repetitive things was when I played with Kurt Elling. That band, you know, would play a show, would make a record, and then you tour that record, so it was a show. And that was cool too, playing the same stuff, you know, the same show, same set opener. Then you really just, you can get really into the details, you know, and there's more specific parameters, and so you get sort of more detail oriented, and you know how you're going to play that passage, how you're going to make that sound a little bit better, you know, each night. So yeah, it's so valuable. And like George said, you don't get. I feel for young musicians because they don't get that opportunity. Yeah. You know.
One mic. Pass the mic. I was going to ask. I'm glad you mentioned that. And I know maybe Eric, you can speak to this because I know you've done a lot of performing and educating and working with these guys. They're in the state of affairs in terms of the music business right now in clubs and places to play and touring. Having that experience where a band can be together and play regularly seems smaller and smaller and smaller, you know. And even if you find a rhythm section that you enjoy playing with, you know, like let's say like there's a handful of bass players, you know, but everyone's trying to hire those bass players, so it's hard to get the same people on the same gig to get that rapport developed. I mean, can you speak to that from your experience as a bassist?
Boy, I'm on the spot. Well, first of all, I will preemptively state that while I am a working bass player in Portland, I have 2 lives. You know, I'm not a full-time musician, so there are a lot of opportunities that I should say that I would like to have, that I don't really have that opportunity because I have my obligations of my day job, you know, and you know, I've been working and playing in Portland now for 20 years, and to be able to play with the same cats, kind of playing off what George was saying earlier, for any length of time is just, it's a godsend, really, just because you get the chance to develop and it's not really something that I've had a long-term opportunity to basically develop that creativity within, you know, a set group of guys. So remind me the source of the question that you said.
So basically we're asking, with younger musicians, it seems to be, at least in my opinion, more and more difficult to find opportunities to get a band working
Yeah, true. I mean, and especially in Portland, there's a limited number of guys, and there are a limited number of very, very talented musicians, and they might all have different things, different projects going on, and to get them together. I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure where I'm going with this. I'm not very much of a speaker. Let's just say that. I'm good at listening. But Portland's hard for one thing because there's not a whole lot of places to play. It's kind of it's been rough the last 10 years or so because places close. They're not going to stay open all that long. We have a great place in Portland right now at the 1905, and it's got a pretty good following, and we've got people coming through town and playing, and it's something that we really want to keep going, so we can continue having opportunities like this to play, in Portland and beyond. But I don't know. I mean, I guess that's kind of what I have to say about all that.
So with, I know there were some issues with audio. It looks like we got it fixed now. Yeah, harumph. No one heard a thing. It's all right. No, they just let me know that. Yeah. So the question, or what was brought up, is like, you both feel very fortunate to have had those experiences where you could work with a group for a 10-week period or for a 20-year period to really get in and know people's music and see how that develops. And then we mentioned how, it's a challenge now because people can't have those same experiences. It's very difficult to have those same experiences now given the state of affairs with the music industry and the music business, for lack of a better term. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
In case any young musicians are watching, because we're talking about how difficult it is, and I even said I feel for them. First of all, I'm amazed at the hustle and creativity of young musicians in creating gigs. They'll find places to play, and that's kind of what you have to do. But the other thing I would say is get together with your peers and play. You don't have to have a gig. Get together in someone's basement once a week, twice a week, every night if you can. Everyone has busy lives, but if you want to do this, make time to play. It amazes me when I hear young people saying, I just don't have any place to play. I'm like, are you getting together with people? Because that's something I always have valued, and still to this day I get together. Usually it's with the younger musicians, because the older guys have lives. They're busy. They get a day job. George has 2 kids and a day job and 80 gigs and plays all the, so like if someone will come to my house to play, I'm down. I'll make time to do that. So that's what I wanted to say, is if you have to make time to play.
No, that's a great point. I'm actually glad that you brought that up, because I was going to ask, since there aren't the opportunities like there were to tour for long periods of time, what are some solutions that people can do to get that experience, to at least get those skills together so that they can have a rapport without touring for 10 weeks? Your Eminence?
It's interesting because, and there's really no excuse now, because now that everything is really totally back in person, but it's something I've been threatening to do for a long time, and that is I don't quite know exactly how I'm going to do it, but with at least one, if not 2 of my student ensembles at Portland State University, I want to have some situation, and it might have to be manufactured, but I want us to have some experience where we play the same music multiple nights. Like instead of meeting once a week for 10 weeks, why not have some kind of performance opportunity for 10 nights in a row? So maybe that could be something on campus, something at 1905, something at some other place, something out in the park, whatever it is. I mean, even if it was 5 times, and to use that as a way to see, like, okay, like, we started here and now we're here. Like, it should improve. If it doesn't, then you have to ask yourself why. So to me, that's I have a lot of things that I put under the category of doing it for real, which as an educator, well, as a musician first and an educator second, in jazz at least, I feel like that's always the gauge of whether anything you're doing is really worth it or not. Because academia, from my experience, is really good at, sort of creating these, curriculums that you got to question, like, why are we doing this? That sort of thing. Like, is this really necessary to become a professional musician, or is this really, like, are we really current on this? That sort of thing. So that's something I always question. And so in that sense, like, the doing it for real is what it's supposed to be about. People can get doctorates and, their master's degree, whatever it is, and that's cool, and you can do a dissertation, and you can do something very academic, and that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it is, this is art music to me. I mean, that's the funny thing about jazz. It's folk music, but it's art music. And so you can be very intellectual about it if you want. I mean, honestly, not to go off on too many tangents, but that's kind of why it has a weird place in our society, because people don't know, is it folk music or is it art music? Is it highbrow? Is it lowbrow? So, but anyway, the point is, to me, because at least as a jazz pianist, the bulk of my learning was on my own, or in the streets, like going to gigs in Baltimore, going to gigs in DC, and as an audience member, and then as a player, and just learning on the job. I mean, I went to a classical conservatory and I did classical trumpet and music ed. So the only jazz classes, there was a jazz band that wasn't super happening, and we had one jazz history class, but other than that, there wasn't any kind of jazz curriculum. That was just me on my own. That was a side thing, totally. Plus Peabody Conservatory, I mean, it's different now because they have a jazz program, but when I was there was no jazz program. So there was, if you said you were doing jazz, people would be like, what? Like, what are you doing? Like, that's not serious music, So we had to do it on our own. And so when my students say, hey, I wish we covered this in the curriculum, I'm like, I didn't have a not to, again, sound like I'm 1,000 years old, but I was like, I didn't have any curriculum. I just learned tunes and learned solos and learned licks and took stuff off of records, and just, so now it's in academia, for better or for worse. So, but to me, it has to always be, there has to be a point to it. And we lose sight of that very easily, because we're like, well, what are the learning outcomes, and what's your rubric, and what's your curriculum, and what's your this and that, and it has to be to serve to really be, the music is the music, so it has to be to further your ability to play the music. It shouldn't be just like, oh, well, I'm trying to do my dissertation on whatever. I mean, which to me that's a separate thing, and that there can be a place for it. So the playing, having that opportunity to just play, 5 times in a row, 10 times in a row, that would be really great. I'm trying to figure out a way to do that. It might be tricky, but the proof is in the pudding. So it's like that's more what I care about. Like, you could have 5 doctorates in music, but if you're not swinging, you know what I mean? Not to sound like Ali Jackson, but you know what I mean? Like, but that's kind of what it is. It's like, can you play or not? And then it used to be, and it's changing now, because I have some friends who are either have their doctorate, their DMA, or I went back and got my master's. But there's people with degrees now who are also serious players, But it used to be like, it was sort of always the opposite. Like, people that had no degree were killing, and people who had their DMAs were always sad. That was just always the thing that we joked about. It's like, oh, the person with the most degrees because they've been mostly in academia. And again, it's easy to lose sight of why. To me, it's like, why? You know. So now again, Jimmy Green has his DMA. My friend Andrew Rathman has his DMA. Alex Norris is brilliant, and he's from the streets as well, although we went to Peabody together. But he got his DMA. So it's changing a lot. But again, it's like, it's got to be for the right reasons.
Well, again, going back to, you know, being with the same group of musicians and playing the same music and having that develop over time. You know, speaking of Ali, he always mentions levels. I mean, there's always different levels of music. I mean, you can know the music, but there's lots of different levels of knowing the music. So, for example, I think it was last year when you guys played together. It was you and Omar Avital and Ali, and you guys had not spent time playing together as a group, you know, for long periods of time. I think maybe that was the first time, maybe. You had never played with them. But the musicianship and locking up as a band was very, very high. Now, what can you attribute that to if you guys haven't spent time together playing gig after gig after gig and knowing each other's playing? So how is that possible? I have my own theories, but I'd like you to speak to this as someone who played in the group.
Well, I'm just blessed. Yeah, right. No. Well, I mean, I did play with Ali some in the late '90s, early 2000s. You know, here and there.
But not like 10 weeks in a row.
No, not really. No, we did a little short tour with Buster, and like I said, I don't think I had ever played with Omer. But you know, that's the thing is to me, it's a conversation. It's the language, you know. So that's the beauty of jazz and like we said, you can mix and match players, and if they speak the language, it can be really on a high level. So that's a lot of it too. It's like, it's not necessarily like it's about the music, but it can transcend the repertoire. Repertoire is important. I mean, and whatever music you're playing, you got to know it. You got to be cool with it. But it's really more about the ability to have a conversation, you know. I mean, it's kind of like this is totally unprepared. So, but we just speak from the heart, and we all speak English, and you know, we have experiences from years and years and years. And when you could have a really great, I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, there's so many examples, but like, again, you put great players together, it kind of doesn't matter what they play, in a way. It's going to be killing, you know, because it's kind of like when you watch, you know, those old Carson reruns, you know what I mean? You get, if you put Frank Sinatra and Don Rickles on the stage, it's just going to be amazing. They're not preparing that. That's just, they just show up and be who they are, and they're killing, you know. So there is a lot of that, and that's another thing that we do too, because we're it's not just about, oh, we know the music, that you're supposed to know the repertoire, but you know, we speak the same rhythmic language, and that's with Omer and Ali, you know, that comes from having reference points. You know what I mean? It's like we know a lot of the same records, we listen to a lot of the same people, that type of thing, you know. So
no, just the same thing that you're saying. It's just language is the perfect analogy, because it's like you start out, yeah, we all speak English, so now we can have a conversation. No one stands and says, that's amazing, you guys have never met and you're talking to one another. You know, now if you happen to meet, you know, you're sitting next to someone on a plane, you both happen to have read a lot of the same books, then maybe you're not just talking to one another, but you can talk about poetry, or you can talk, like, you know, what, you're into Walt Whitman, you can really talk about it. So that's what he's saying, is that like we know the language, and then if you know the same, if you're into the same records, you know, because I can tell you that's where a generation thing can be challenging. You know, I played with Vaughn, he played with Bird, you know, so he came out of Bird, and even something Steve Coleman pointed out, Steve likes to interview people, and it's the guys that he admires. And Clifford Jordan said that about Vaughn, because he's another Chicago tenor player. He talked to all those guys, Stitt and Griff, and Clifford said, you know, the big difference about Vaughn is he's just a few years older than us, 3 or 4 years older than all the other guys you mentioned, but he the difference is Bird had already hit the scene, when we were 18 or 19, so we were just listening to Bird. Vaughn already knew Prez, because he was just old enough that there was a whole thing before Bird made everything about Bird, So that's a perfect example of like that to them gave him a sort of an extra sort of depth, And so when you play with older guys now, and you're a young guy and you don't even know. I remember asking a young, talented trumpet player about, he was asking me about something. I was like, just like the way the eighth notes feel. I mean, like, I don't know, like Lee Morgan's a great example. He didn't know who Lee Morgan was. So like that'd be a big difference between his experience of the music and mine. So yeah, it's language and then, sort of again, the levels of, the depth of what you've checked out.
I mean, it's an interesting point that you bring up because, there's always a different point of departure, and I think if we see it all as a continuum and sort of all as like just a process. So whoever this person you were talking to, if they said, I don't know who Lee Morgan is, and you were like, oh yeah, you should check out Lee Morgan, not like, oh, you don't know Lee Morgan, but if they use that opportunity, and it's so easy now to do that. You know what I mean? Like, you can just go check out, dial it up on your phone and be like, oh, wow, I've really been missing out, So, he's very good. But not everybody knows everything. So that's the thing, so that's where the kind of multi-generational thing is really cool. Like, I mean, again, Michael's chance to play with Vaughn Freeman for those years, that's an example of a multi-generational experience, For me, playing with Buster Williams, or DeJohnette, or, those type of players, Lenny White, I go into it with a certain type of humility. It's like my point of departure might be very different. I mean, I'm 53, Buster's, I think, 83, so 82, 83, so he's got 30 years on me. I mean, stuff that I might be like, oh, this is interesting. He's like, yeah, I'm on that record, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, or I played with that person in 1958, So I'm often, I told him, I said, Buster, I don't know how anything I play, because what I like to do is, if I can, it doesn't always happen, but every now and then, if I play something like a reharm or something, and because Buster is where you are, he's right in the crook of the piano, so he's really hearing me a little bit more than I'm hearing myself. So I might try to get him to give me a woo, that type of thing. Try to get a look from him like woo, But I said, hey, you play with Herbie Hancock, and list of pianists you've played with him, Horace Silver, McCoy, Cedar, it's insane, and he's like, well, everybody has their stuff that they play, you know what I mean? And he keeps calling me. See, that's the thing. I don't need any sort of grandiose accolades from Buster. To me, if he calls and asks about a date, that's enough for me. I don't need, because that's a lot of people are like, oh, you sound amazing, or or if you don't tell them that, they've like, well, what do you think of my playing? And to me, it's like, if you get the call, that should be enough. I'm calling you for the gig, right? That means I'm at least somewhat happy with what you're doing. You know what I mean? So, getting the call from Buster to me is that's all I need. You just need a little bit to be co-signed, just a little bit. It doesn't have to be anything, like in writing, like. Well, yeah, but again, I'll take it when I can get it. But if I don't get it, I'm like, it's fine. Well, and here's the thing: is Buster? He can be very direct. So if he doesn't like what you're doing, he's going to. So I've been really fortunate. I've been playing with him off and on since 1995. That was the first time I played with him. So, and I've seen instances where he was very direct with his opinions, and it was not the optimal situation. Although, he's within his rights. He's mellowed a lot as an older person, but again, a lot of this is because he cares so much. I mean, it's his whole life. That's the thing about playing with the older cats too, is that, you know, somebody like Vaughn or whatever, that's their life. So it's got to be right. You know, it's not a game. It's not just playing in the sense of like, oh, we're just jamming. It's like, no, this is our life. We take this really seriously. So you have to kind of recognize that when you play with people like that. Respect that. I don't know if we've done so many interviews. I don't remember. Did I tell the Ernestine Anderson story?
I can't remember. It's ringing a bell vaguely, but I don't. Tell it again. Tell it again.
Are you sure? Well, anyway, it's funny because we just passed where we stayed in Seattle. There was an Ernestine Anderson community center because she's originally from Seattle. But I got a call. I was like maybe 22, 23. I got a call. I told you the story, yeah? You sure? All right. See, that's the thing. You get older, you just tell the same boring stories. You know? What was Christmas like in the 40s? So I got this call from the bass player, Keter Betts, who was a DC fixture, but he also is on a bunch of records. And he said, hey, you know, pianist who will not be named in this story didn't show up. Do you have a tuxedo? I was like, I do. He's like, can you come down? You have 3 nights at Blues Alley. I was like, yeah. And he's like, it's with Ernestine Anderson. I was like, cool, okay. So the band was, you know, Ernestine Anderson, myself, Keter Betts, and a drummer named Harold Mann. They were all in their mid-60s. I'm like 22, 23. And so their experience is very different, you know, but we're all speaking a similar language, you know, and I'm really trying to speak their language, you know, but I'm not doing it. So I'm just, you know, again, I'm just stepping into trying to read these charts and, you know, little sound check rehearsal and whatever. I'm just trying to figure it all out, you know. And after the first set, can I curse? All right, I'll.
For the sake of education, sure. You're documenting.
It's not. So Keter said, "Hey, George, don't be playing that Chick Corea shit." he said, "Just play block chords and comp, and just play the blues, you know." And I was like, "Okay, cool, you know." And again, I'm just like, I hope I'm doing a good job. I'm like, because often with a vocalist, whether it's explicit or not, the pianist is kind of the MD. Like to me, with jazz vocalists, again, there's lots of different ways to do it, but it's like you have your vocalist, then you have like the vocalist is the commander in chief, and then the pianist is like the 4-star general, you know, and you disseminate orders to the rest of the band. But in this case, it was tough because everyone else is so much more experienced and so much older. And they know how to do it, but I'm trying to, you know, figure it out. And there was one tune where it's like a turnaround at the end, and it's like, you know, kind of swing and shuffle, and I'm trying to play the turnaround, and I think I'm doing it right. And I mean, again, the charts are just all chicken scratch, you know, and Ernestine, she's going like turn around, and I'm like, but I am turning around, you know, and I'm just like, I think it's right, and she's just like turn around. I'm like, gosh, I don't know what's going on, you know. So sometimes you have to have an instinct, you know. You have to go off of instinct, and for some reason, I got kind of spooked, and my instinct told me time to end the song. So in that split second, I'm like, the thought is just end it, to get out, you know. So I go doot doot ba-doot doot doot, and that message, that order, if you will, that executive order. Well, from me, I'm almost like, what would be the analogy? It's like I went rogue, sort of, you know, or I made a command in the field based on the information I had. So that information goes to Keter and Harold, but the commander in chief that's not what she wanted to do. So she's just like, no, no. So she's freaking out, but the drummer and bassist, they haven't quite gotten that message yet. So they went with the da-da-da-da, bang, and they're just like thinking the song is over. And she's just like, no, no. And I'm like, oh, go back to the turnaround. Somehow try to salvage it. And they had just stopped. And so it's huge train wreck, you know, and she's just, you know, going bananas. She's just like, don't finish the song until I'm finished what I got to say. And the whole audience is just laughing, you know, and it's kind of my fault, you know, and my tux is like soaked. It's like, I just was humiliated. But I look back on that because to me, it's like, that's the type of thing, like if I had had more experience and more confidence, that probably wouldn't have happened. Like it's the ability not just to play and read charts, but also read people, you know, and pick up on vibrations. And essentially, you can't read anybody's mind, but you sort of have to. So it's like sort of developing that rapport with other musicians and learning to think and react. So that's where you get into the experience. Like it isn't just like, hey, here's a real book tune, let's read it down and then go home, you know. That's not where the music is. That's the school part. That's the safe, like, let's rehearse it for 10 weeks and then we'll gently ease you into a concert experience and everybody's gonna get a solo and everybody's gonna feel good about it, and you know, no, we're not gonna challenge you unreasonably. And you know, am I getting on my high horse? You know, it's like, but that's what we often do in education. It's like we want everybody to feel comfortable, you know. But the way this music developed wasn't necessarily like that. It was situations where people were, I mean, again, they took it seriously, but it was like, to me, that's the beauty of the bandstand in a way, is that you know, you, again, doing it for real. Like, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what it's supposed to be, but you better figure it out. And if you don't, you might have a difficult situation. But to me, that was like, it was just a wake-up call. It was like, this is not a game. You're not, you know, you can be a 22-year-old, 23-year-old kid, but you have to, if you want to do this with the best people, you have to take it as seriously as they do. You know what I mean? It's not just like, oh, let's jam. You know, to Ernestine Anderson, that was her whole life. You know, that's why we do it ultimately, because that's in spite of all the challenges, like we do it for the love of the music, you know. And it was a great, that to me, and other experiences like those were really, I see those now. The more that the time goes on, I see those as really important. Like I said, I didn't have jazz classes at Peabody where somebody said, hey, you do this. It was trying to figure it out. Maybe I do this, or you know, you ask people and they might tell you and they might not. You know what I mean? They might just vibe you, you know, like that type of thing. So, anything you want to add to that?
I have a question. Go ahead. I'll be really quick.
I hogged the ball. I'm sorry.
Well, so, and I know all of you guys play first sessions, sideman work, and lead your own band. Erica, do you lead your own band, or is it mostly sideman stuff?
Sometimes I do it, like I lead a trio.
Okay.
But I'm not, I mean, these guys are, you know, I haven't had the life experience because of choices to have a day job early in my career.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Well, speaking of education and not having the jazz studies, and now we have way more jazz studies and resources for people to study and learn, without having those experiences and not having the same kind of sense of urgency that those situations that you were in and benefited from. And because it's more, you know, it's, as you said, jazz is folk music, but it's also art music, and maybe it's more focused on the art. And do you feel that has the amount of academia hurt the musicianship and the music and where it is today versus, yeah.
George might not be able to speak as freely on this because he has a job as a teacher, but No, yeah, I think I'm not going to say it's hurt it, but it has changed the music. This music is an oral tradition. This music you're supposed to go hear great, going back to Vaughn, he used to go hear Lester Young, and he and his buddies, they had Lester's solos memorized from the records. They knew his whole solos. And Lester started blowing. He said, we'd be like this, like we'd have our hands up like we were playing the saxophone, sideways, and like be trying to sing along with his solo, even live, when he was playing. Like they they knew what was happening with their ears. So then when they got instruments, Vaughn's first instrument was he took the arm off of the Victrola that his father had because he thought the music was coming from the Victrola. So when he was 5, he broke the arm off and would blow through the thing. His dad almost killed him, when he came home as he messed up his Victrola. But yeah, you reminded me. I was thinking of a thing that happened to me on the South Side when I played with Vaughn. I was on the South Side of Chicago at a club called the New Apartment Lounge. People had been coming down there and hearing music. Like people knew jazz down at that club. They're like, I remember hearing Vaughn with Dexter Gordon in the Red Room. It was the room next door. And they would tell me about like the tradition, and they would hear these saxophone battles with Gene Ammons and Stitt and Vaughn and people that would come through town, and Johnny Griffin and all these organ bands, when that was all the rage. And so when I started playing with Vaughn, he saw that I had some creativity is what he really sort of talked about, is that you express yourself, or he told my friend that, but he just took a chance on a young guy, maybe because of the enthusiasm and some little spark. But I didn't have my thing together, I was 22 when I started playing with him. And what I noticed was I'd play all night, trying my hardest, and, pretty lukewarm reception from the crowd, from the, people at the bar. And then someone come in, Marvin Jones was a drummer, I remember, come from Kansas City, and he'd come and sit in, and all of a sudden ladies at the bar would be like, oh, shit! They'd had, like they were in church, because they were feeling the beat more, and I didn't know how to make that happen yet. And I was trying to analyze it, like, is it because he plays more quarter notes? Where's the ding-a-ding? Like I was trying, and I had to be down there for a while. I went down the street. This is a Tuesday night, right? And you could go either way, 3 blocks, and there was live jazz happening on 75th Street. And so the other place, I think it was called, literally. I remember playing with Charles Erlin and Bobby Broom down there. Like they have weekend gigs, And then on Tuesdays, this great alto saxophone player, I've forgotten his name, Art, but older than me, but a young guy. I had a band down there. Eric Alexander, when he was in town, played down there every Tuesday for a while. And then the other direction, there was an organ band. And I remember going down, and Vaughn was always saying, Michael, look here. And he'd hold his fist up. And I'd be like, he doesn't know how to play drums. The drums, you use your fingertips. And, he's a saxophonist. But, Michael, sanctified. These things, this isn't what you're hearing in college. And then I went down and I heard this drummer playing, and sure enough, he had his whole fist around the stick. Now, you can watch YouTube videos of older cats play, Jimmy Cobb, all these guys, unless they're playing really fast, that's how they're holding the stick. That projects a different beat if you play into the cymbal, and the cymbal, you don't let the cymbal play the stick. And it creates a harder cymbal beat, like a more defined beat. And these are things Vaughn was trying to tell me in language that no college uses. And that was one of the things that, seeing that guy and all the things he said, I went back and I started playing that way, and it changed. It changed the room. It changed the feeling of the thing. And Vaughn literally, immediately just says, yeah, Michael, like he so that's it's hard to get that in school unless you have a teacher like George. I mean, a lot of schools now are getting cats that can really play, but a lot of times there's someone teaching that maybe didn't have those experiences, And so, again, you have to go hear music. You have to listen to records. You have to fall asleep. I used to play Kind of Blue. I just put it on repeat and sleep all night with it playing, because I wanted to get that in, and that sound into me.
I think maybe that's part of it. A lot of the younger musicians, not necessarily speaking of age, but that are playing and getting into it, they'll learn the melody, they'll learn the changes. They have technique, but they're not listening to music. So there's no point of reference, and there's nothing in terms of language. It's like, well, yeah, they're playing right notes, and maybe the rhythms sound good, but in terms of actually creating a melody of something of substance or interacting or having a conversation with the band never happens, and they don't even realize it. And I don't know. I'm putting in my own opinions, but feel free to speak that, because you have plenty of great students that come out and really know how to play. I mean, so clearly you're doing something right. I mean, do you have any thoughts about that?
Some of the students.
I didn't say all.
Not all.
I didn't say all.
I mean, it can't be all, but it is a concern because they're all in one way or the other sort of under my jurisdiction. So it would be great if and some of it is just because, yeah, again, it's professional music is hard. So we cannot, it would be weird. I mean, no one would ever hold us to it, I guess, but to say like, oh, everyone who comes to my program goes out and becomes a professional musician. No music school can say that. It's just sort of like you can come here and try and see how you do. And you never know because, look, if you had heard me play classical trumpet as a freshman at Peabody, if you heard my audition for the orchestra, for the Peabody Orchestra, you'd be like, he's never going to do anything, Yeah, I was terrible. But, give people a chance. And we've had students who weren't great at playing jazz guitar, say, but then they went and made some hip-hop music and made more money than I have. So, like, there's all kinds of ways to be successful, and you never really know. But, still, like, kind of what Michael's saying, again, it's like, and this just goes into the idea of, like, what is the purpose of what you're doing, and what are you really trying to do? And I think a lot of students, they just think, oh, if I go into a jazz program, then I'll come out and be a jazz musician. And it's like, it's hard. It's not, I want to be clear. It's not like playing in a high school jazz band. Being what I would call a jazz musician is not like just playing in your high school jazz band. Obviously, some people play in their high school jazz band, which I did, and then you go further. But some people think like, oh, me majoring in jazz or trying to become a jazz musician in a jazz program is going to be just like it was playing in my jazz band in high school. And that's not it. That isn't it. It just isn't, First of all, the big band era died in 1947. So if you're like, well, I want to be in a jazz band professionally, you could join one of the military bands, but there really aren't a whole lot of professional, like, big bands. And if there are, the pay is, logically not great because you got to pay 17 people, So that's the thing is, so you have to figure out a way to become versatile and to be able to solo and know tunes and function on a jazz gig and maybe learn how to do other things too, But, again, it's you try to point people in the right direction and you try to give them all the information you can. But I can't practice for my students, so I can point them in the direction, but they have to actually go do it. It takes a lot of time, we've all spent a lot of time with our instruments, Now when people hear us, they're like, oh, that's cool. But it's like, this is advanced playing for those of the people online who stick around and hear us play. You know what I mean? It's advanced. It takes years and years and years. Yes?
This is no offense to George or any other educator or college or whatever, I did go to college for music, but I really feel like I didn't learn what I do at college. I learned it from listening to records and emulating them and playing with people outside of school. There are certain things that in college that and high school and whatnot that I can attribute to, like how to play in a group and at least the entry level part of that. You learn how to listen to people and whatnot. But really, I became the player that I am because of what I listened to, and how I tried to copy as much as I possibly could. You know, I want to sound exactly like Ray Brown, and that's how it was in the 90s for me. I wanted to sound exactly like Ray Brown, and then I found out that I wanted to sound like Christian McBride, and I wanted to sound like Scott LaFaro, and you know, it's just finding your heroes and trying to sound just like them. You eventually sound like yourself, and I didn't learn that in school. I learned jazz history. I learned music history in general. You know, I got to play in the symphony, which was great. But what I truly love is playing this music with cats that are better than me. You know, and that's where my joy is. You know, and just really drum in the fact that you got to listen. You gotta listen your brains out to find what you want to do, find out how you want to play. So that's my 2 cents about this whole thing. Go to school.
Well, we're getting close to the end here. So if anybody has any questions for anyone here, please put them in the comments, and we'll do our best to get to them. And also, before we wrap up, since I don't think it got on the video earlier, thank you to our sponsors. And again, that's Ted Brown Music, where we're broadcasting from today, KNKX, Tacoma Creates, BCR8 Design, Titus Will Cars, and Edward Jones Financial Consultant Rick Gray. And of course, everyone who tunes in to watch these things and comes after the concerts, we appreciate it, and it makes this possible. So thank you. Let's see. Rather than asking the normal question about wisdom imparted, because you've already answered the question like 4 or 5 times, like if students, yeah, you know what I would ask, in closing, if there's no questions coming in, the trio, I mean, this is your trio, is it pretty much, is it run with an iron fist, or is it like a democracy? Things are open to interpretation and input, or is it just like George Colligan's gonna, you know, how is it, how do things come about in the band? I'm stumbling over my words here, but I mean, is it a lot of like general input, or is it like, this is the way it's gonna be, this is what I want, things are open, or how do you run the band?
I don't, you know, everybody's, if you know, again, there is something to be said for having a leader, you know, and I have observed how to be a leader in a lot of different ways because I've been a side person in so many bands. And that's one thing that I always felt like some of the people in the Young Lions era, and honestly maybe now too, like if you've never had a lot of those experiences, then you're just kind of going on your own. You're like, oh, this is how I'm supposed to be a leader. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of those Young Lions people, or people that got a little bit of success, if they lasted, they got better. You know what I mean? But to me, I think it's important to do both, to lead, so you know what it's like to be a leader, but then also to have some kind of experience being underneath someone, you know. So, but for me, I will say this, that, you know, I do, the main reason I want to lead a trio is to play my own music, but it isn't necessarily because I think, you know, oh, I need to be in the spotlight. Like some people, I think, you know, that's why they lead a band, because it has to be really about them and it has to be very controlled. I don't like to do that, because that's like, I don't like to do that in life. You know what I mean? Like some people are just very like, we need to go here, or like, you know, I can't be, you know, like very rigid, and I just think that's you know, not the best way to live your life, you know. So in terms of leading a trio, I want people to feel like they can create and be a part of it. Like, again, we're playing my tunes, but I don't say like, well, on this chord you need to play a, you know, dominant whatever. You know, it's really, I want to see how people interpret it. That's where the fun is, you know what I mean? Because everybody has their own ideas about the music, you know, and that's how you create a group, rather than like, I mean, again, perhaps Ahmad Jamal was more like solo piano with bass and drums accompaniment, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's a tradition in that, I think, you know, but then you have like the Keith Jarrett Trio, which is very much, yeah, I mean, Keith, of course, was his group, but I feel like sonically there was equal input from everybody. And certainly, you know, Keith Jarrett isn't going to say, hey, Jack, could you play brushes on, you know what I mean? It's just, so now I've been really lucky that I played with cats who play with Miles, you know, and with one exception, all of those people that I've played with were really hands off. They were like, this is the repertoire, just play. Just, you know, I hired you because of what you do. I'm not going to try to micromanage you, you know, because because if you have to, then you might as well just get somebody else who can do what it is that you want. You know what I'm saying? So that's from everything I read, you know, and from what those people say, is that mostly Miles didn't say a whole lot. He was more just like, yeah, just he you know, Miles wanted people who would listen and be creative and open-minded, you know, rather than like, you know, I mean, you know, he was kind of the person who invented that way of presenting music, you know. It's like how would he tell Tony Williams, like, you know, how to play the drums, you know what I mean? So just sort of being open, you know. Some of the tunes that we're going to play later, like, are super brand new. So it's just been fun because we just kind of played through them in North Bend, and it's cool to see how they develop, you know. And again, because we've been speaking to each other, like, I can bring in something new, and it's going to have the same vibe. You know, it's not like we have to start from scratch. It's like the foundation is already there.
Yeah, I concur. Yeah, George doesn't never tells me what to play. Yeah, it's very much of that style. I've worked for both types of band leaders, you know, and yeah, it's just especially the new tunes, you know. Sometimes I ask, you know, because I want to get the right shape or the right vibe. But yeah, it's maybe once in the years that we've been playing together, you know, he's gone like this, meaning sticks instead of brushes or something. But like, yeah, it's just do your thing. Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, collective. That's the word I wanted to say. Is it's kind of a collective. However, I will say that there are some times where, like, if I'm soloing, and there's a certain chord quality, and I go outside of it, sometimes I look over and I see George going. yeah, and you know, I. No, I'm not saying that. You know, maybe you're like, wow, you're taking it out. Okay, yeah, but it's not. Yeah, he doesn't tell us what to do, and we all bring our individual voices to basically interpret what we feel about his music, and yeah.
Again, there are non-verbal ways to communicate, or there's sort of like exactly. But it's like if you were in a relationship, and I don't know, I'm probably, you know, you know, well, like if I got to be really careful. I'm married, so you know, for now, yeah. But like, I mean, the reason you want to be with people is so that you don't have to explain everything. If you have to explain everything, then it's like, oh, maybe I should find somebody that I don't have to explain everything. You know what I mean? It's like, I mean, with anything, like if you're trying to think, I'm usually good with analogies, but you know, again, if it's like, oh, like if you, like, for example, if you, like, even just a hang, like we hung all yesterday because, you know, but it was kind of just effortless. Like, we all just watched a movie and we had food, and it was just like, oh, it's cool. But like, you know, we didn't necessarily have to like plan it out in a way that was really, like, it kind of happened organically. Like I said, the gig got canceled in Bellevue. So it was like, all right, we have the Airbnb. I can't get a refund. And so we don't have to drive back and forth. We might as well just enjoy the Airbnb, right? And so it was like, yeah, we're going to want to get food. You don't have to, like, have it all be regimented, you know? it's like just go with the obvious. Like, we're gonna want to eat at some point. Let's eat, you know. And so that type of thing. Like, again, in music, I want the music to be a process, you know. Somebody ask a question?
How long do you usually like to play an original tune live before going into the studio to record it for an album? You might have 3 different answers here.
Well, it all depends. I mean, I've done both. I've had situations where I played certain tunes a lot, and then was fortunate to be able to record. I also did something recently. I got this grant to do what's called the Phyllis Wheatley Project, which was all music that I wrote specifically for this one ensemble. And in fact, I wrote it because I was like, I better find some time to write it. And I wrote it all in like a weekend. And then I put it away because I had other stuff to do. And then, you know, not to bore you with the whole story, but it was like, you know, then we had to perform it, and I sent everybody the music, and it's real heavy with the vocalists. Like, it's this poetry from Phyllis Wheatley, who is the first published African American female author in the United States, and it's pretty wordy. It's almost like it's 18th century poetry, so it's like it's closer to Shakespeare than anything else. So it's got that kind of, it's biblical, like, heavy stuff. And her name is Ziana. She had to learn it all, and I'm like, you know, I trust her because she's learned stuff from me in the past, and she's also a former student. And I was like, but still, like, I didn't know. And the plan was everybody had to kind of come together and do 3 performances and then record. And I was just like, the whole time, like, I hope this works, you know. And it totally did, luckily, but it easily could have been a crash and burn situation. So again, that's part of the process, is sort of being able to feel it out. Like, is this like, even in the studio, like, you'd say, like, how can we make this work, you know? So
No, is that the only question that you have?
Yes, unless there's something. Maybe sometimes they come out on YouTube and I can't see it.
Okay. I mean, I'm not a composer like George. I can add, I guess, just to answer that question, since they're asking, the person may already know this, but I know that because I studied with Paul Wertico, who played with Pat Metheny for a couple of decades. Pat always toured the music before he recorded it, and that was the first I had heard. I had thought that it was more common the other way around. Someone would go into the studio. Certainly those old Blue Note records, they would just go in an afternoon and be learning tunes, and, you know, which is a whole other conversation. It speaks to the level, you know, that Sonny Rollins Volume 2, just an incredible record, because on that given afternoon, it's like Monk and Art Blakey and Sonny Rollins, and, you know, but yeah, they're just either have a sheet, some chicken scratch, or they're just singing the, you know, melody, and boom, they're recording. So.
Yeah. Speaking along those lines, everyone always talks about the Blue Note magic. And there's a book that Maxine Gordon wrote about Dexter, and he actually talks about some of those Blue Note records. They would pay them, and they would take a couple days prior to recording. Not every single one, but they would actually, like, rehearse and play through it for a couple days before doing that, which to me makes more sense, because some of those things are just amazing. It's like, whoa, those guys, and some of those things were live recordings, but I think, you know, other things were worked out in advance, which would make sense. Yeah. I don't know. Eric, any thoughts on this?
I agree with them.
Yeah.
So, you know, I did a thing recently where we played the music that we were going to record. We played, I think, for 10 days straight. It was hard music, so in terms of, like, playing the notes, I think it was beneficial in that we didn't have to, you know, do a lot of overdubbing, and, you know, everybody could basically execute. You know, a lot of it was sort of, you know, technical, whatever. But in terms of the vibe, I think we would have been cool after a few days. You know what I mean? Yeah, I've done both, and certainly as a side person, I've done stuff where we had, you know, multiple rehearsals. I've done stuff where we had no rehearsal. So to me, but again, if it's really jazz. That's where you sort of get into, like, whether it's jazz or whether it's like, you know, whatever you want to call it, American improvised creative music or whatever. So, to me, like, there's a certain spirit that comes from the moment, you know, that is also based on your experience. So, I mean, I'll give you an example with Buster, you know, and I don't think he would mind me talking about it this way, but, you know, his latest record, I flew to New York with no idea what we were going to play, no charts, nothing, and get to the studio. So what are we going to do? And Buster's like, yeah, I'm kind of hearing this thing. He's sitting at the piano playing chords. I'm like, oh, okay. So does anybody have any manuscript paper? So we had to write out stuff, and I mean, it was definitely like old school, like just figure it out. But people don't necessarily know that. So when they hear it, they're like, wow, this is cool. Like, but the thing is, it's Buster. He sounds amazing. It's Lenny White. He sounds amazing. It's Stefan Harris. They're just going to, whatever it is going to be killing. So, yeah, it really runs the gamut. But I mean, you know, I've done a lot of different types of things, stuff that was really, really prepared. It's more, I think it's more about the technical side of it. If it's something like Lonnie Plaxico, for instance, like his music was just really hard. Like it wasn't so much about the improvisation, although that was hard too. But you know, learning those learning the voice, because it's specific voicings, and I don't, you know, I'm just not at the level where I could go in and sight read that, you know. So that needed some homework for sure. But even so, to me, like that's where, again, the professionals they'll do the work they have to do at home. They don't say, well, I'm just going to save it until, like every professional musician, I think you know your threshold. Like if somebody sends you music, you're like, oh, I could probably just be cool reading this, or I might look at it once or whatever, just do minimal homework. And then there's other times where you're like, oh, I need a few weeks for this. So, but you know, we don't have a lot of time to rehearse. We just don't, you know. And also I think rehearsing doesn't necessarily help, because again, that's why I would rather just do it in the moment and learn as we play. To me, playing is different from rehearsing. Some people never, like all my bands, like at PSU, like they rehearse a lot, but I want them to play more, because the playing is where they really learn it, you know.
I think that's a good place to stop, because we need to stop to get ready for the next thing. So, Eric and Michael, Your Eminence, George, thank y'all for putting up with the questions and for being a part of this today. So we're going to take a very short break, reconfigure here, do a quick sound check, and then play some music for you. And so stick around. Hope you enjoy the music. Hope you enjoy the value of the interviews. If you do enjoy the values of the interviews and the performances, please feel free to make a donation online. You can do that via Venmo or PayPal or mailing a check, and all that information is at the beginning of the post here. And thanks for tuning in, and we'll be right back. Thanks a lot.